Welcome to the New Life in Australia podcast, hosted by me, Karen Bleakley, founder of SmartStepsToAustralia.com. Moving to Australia with my family was a life-changing experience, but it wasn't without its challenges. That's why I'm passionate about making the relocation and resettlement process easier for you, so you can enjoy this exciting adventure. Join me and my special guests as we share professional secrets and tips, learn from people who've made the move, and discover businesses that can help you realise your dreams. Now is the best time to create the life you've always wanted. This podcast is here to show you what's possible and to inspire you every step of the way. Let's go.
Let's take a moment to acknowledge the Gubbi Gubbi people, the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which I live, work and play. I thank them for the privilege of being able to live in such an incredible part of the world, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Hey there, Karen here. I just wanted to drop in to do a quick introduction to this week's episode. It was a really vulnerable episode for me this week, really difficult one to record because I was talking all about losing my dad recently and all of the things that I've learned through the process. I definitely don't think it's something that is talked about enough, so I really wanted to cover it in a podcast episode because I had so much to say on the subject. It was a really difficult one to record though, so bear with me. There were definitely lots of cuts and edits and sniffling and tissues and things going on, but I got through it in the end and I hope you'll find it really useful. So let's get started and I'll cut to the episode. Hey there, welcome to this week's episode of the New Life in Australia podcast. My name's Karen Bleakley and I'm your podcast host. And this week I'm going to be having quite a difficult conversation. I'm going to be talking about losing my dad earlier in the year. Now I'm going to try my best to get through it without getting too upset or being too teary. I'm just going to try and focus on sharing so many things that came out of the experience because it really did teach me a lot. And it was our first experience of losing anybody since we moved to Australia. And I know it's not something that gets talked about very often because it's a really difficult subject to talk about. Now, to give you some context, my dad was in his 80s. He'd lived a great life. His health had been declining over the last few years because he was a regular smoker and he'd spent his whole career spraying cars for a living, and that was long before health and safety standards were introduced. So he didn't have the best chest. His breathing was often a struggle, but he tried to stay sort of active and get out and about. And it really had been the last few years since sort of the COVID kind of era when he'd become less active, but he was still up and about. He was still regularly going out every day. And it was a real shock to the system when we found out that he wasn't very well. It did all come about very quickly, but I am really grateful that we did have a little time to get our heads around it before he actually passed away. He actually found out that he had cancer and a few days later found out that it was terminal, and then a few days later was in hospital where he continued to decline and passed away really within a couple of weeks of actually hearing that he had cancer in the first place. So it was a real shock. We thought we had more time, as everybody always does, but it was a really difficult thing to navigate, especially when you're on the other side of the world to the rest of your family. So when we received the news that he had cancer and that he was not going to have much time left, we started having those really difficult conversations like, what are we going to do? Are we all going to travel back? Am I going to travel back on my own? When am I going to travel back? If I travel back on my own, how are the kids going to get to school? Because I normally do the school runs. My husband works really strange shifts all over the place. How would we manage after school activities? How would we figure it all out? It was the middle of term. Could we wait and go back during the school holidays? Did he have enough time? There were just so many things to figure out and it was really difficult. And we just went through all the conversations for a few days trying to figure it out. We didn't think that time was of the immediate essence. The doctors had kind of said nothing will happen immediately. So we kind of felt like we had a little bit of time to play with, but it ended up being a much less time than we actually expected to have. We decided after a really difficult conversation that we would all go back, all five of us. Now, I'm really, really lucky that my husband works for an international airline, so that really helps when it comes to getting last-minute flights back that really, really was helpful for us. So that made the decision a bit easier to take all of us back. We were in the middle of term. We've got twins in grade 9 and a daughter in grade 6. So that was quite a difficult thing to think about. Do we pull them out of school? How long are we going to be away for? But we kind of thought, well, if we all go back together for a couple of weeks and then we can judge it from there. Hopefully by the time a couple of weeks is up, we'll have more information, we'll know what's going on. And then if needs be, Matt and the kids could come back to Australia and I could stay in the UK for longer. I'm kind of fairly location independent when it comes to writing and working and podcasting and all of that kind of stuff. So I thought that it was going to be an option that I stayed back, support my mum and just be around to help with whatever was needed. But as I say, it was all really unknown, and that just makes decision making really, really difficult. As things changed over the next few days, we'd originally planned a date when we'd travel. Then I started realising we needed to bring that travel date further forward. So we'd set a travel date for a week from the date we decided we'd go. We gave ourselves a week to get ourselves organised, to pack, to organise what we needed to for getting our dog into kennels, to gather what we needed in terms of schoolwork to take back so that the kids had something that they could be working on while we were away and they wouldn't miss too much. So there was just so much logistical stuff going on. And we also needed to organise an Airbnb or hotel to stay in when we were in Lincoln, because we didn't have anywhere that we'd be able to stay. Last time we went back, we stayed with a family member that we couldn't stay with this time because they were in the middle of doing some renovations and things. So we knew we'd need an Airbnb. Because we were heading straight up to Lincoln, where my family are, we'd also need a hire car rather than like normally we can borrow a car from Matt's family because they're on the south coast and we normally go there first. We didn't want to head south before heading north, so we had to hire a car. There was travel insurance and there was just so much to organise. So we thought giving ourselves 1 week to plan the trip would be okay, but things went downhill, so we needed to bring it forward a little bit. We brought it forward a couple of days, and then we brought it forward again. And in the end, it still wasn't quick enough, unfortunately. My dad passed away. This episode's going to take a lot longer to record because I keep stopping to have some little tearful breaks in between, and I'm afraid I'm going to get more snotty as we go on. So yeah, unfortunately, my dad passed away on the day that we ended up travelling back. So we'd been planning that we'd be going back on this Saturday, and he passed away in the morning, and we were travelling in the late afternoon. So in some ways, it made the journey back a little calmer because, yes, we were grieving, but we were travelling there without that sense of urgency anymore. And I know that I would have been really stressed travelling back, not knowing how long he had left and panicking about things like staying over in an airport hotel in London and having rest, which is really important after a really long journey before sort of hiring a car and going off on a long drive. But I would have been really stressed with that if I'd been worried that he might pass away while we're sleeping or something in an airport hotel. I would have felt like I really wanted to just keep moving. So in some ways, it was a really difficult trip back to make, but it was a little bit calmer because it was over by that point. When you move to a different country, this is just one of those things that you have to navigate. It's really difficult. I dreaded it for years and years and years. I was just kind of on edge, waiting for it to happen, waiting for us to lose somebody, and really had this sense of panic at the back of my mind all the time that one day it would happen. And it did. And actually, all of that panicking doesn't really help anything. It doesn't stop it from happening. It doesn't help you be prepared for it when it actually does happen or any of that. Really, it's kind of just wasting energy worrying about something that will be inevitable at some point. But yeah, I just wanted to share some of the things that sort of I've learned through the experience that we've been through, because I don't think it's a topic that gets talked about enough. And it really has opened my eyes to it, and I feel more able to cope when it happens again in future. And unfortunately, it will happen again in future. We do live on the opposite side of the world. But even if we didn't, people pass away, whether you live close to them or not. So it is just that idea of grief and losing people. It's really difficult whether you live near them or you live a long way away. It just adds a few more complications when you live further away. I'm back now and a bit less snotty. So some of the things that I've really learned through the process of the last few weeks, few months are, number one, talk about it before something happens. So talk about it with your partner if you've got one, with your kids, with your wider family. Have discussions. You don't need to make decisions about how you're going to react in that moment, because circumstances are always so different and it's impossible to know what might happen or how it might happen. But have conversations around it. If you can, try and come up with an idea of what you might do in circumstances. Like we always said that if anything happened to either of our parents or our niece or nephews or either of our siblings, then we would all go back to the UK for that happening. We decided if things happened to further apart family members or to friends, then that might be an occasion where one of us would go back to help support people or to go to the funeral. This all changes because circumstances will be different at different times. Sometimes it might suit you all to go back, sometimes it might not. Sometimes it's just going to be more logical and easier for one of you to go back. But starting the conversation, I think, is really important. So you're on the same page and you know that when things happen, you're ready to just get back to that conversation and figure out what feels like the best decision. The next point is to understand that you might not know all of the facts and things can change really quickly as well. Things are out of your control. So we were under the impression we had a bit more time and that we didn't need to rush. We were told that things weren't going to happen immediately, but things did change really quickly. And really, some of the information that we were being given was kind of theoretical information rather than information based on current results. So you kind of feel like you're trusting that information. So when we were told that my dad would probably be going into a nursing home the next day, we were talking about how my mum would manage to visit him in a nursing home because she didn't drive. And we were kind of thinking about logical next steps and thinking that if he's in a nursing home, then he might be in there for weeks or months. We just didn't know. Yet the next day, the doctors had different results and they were saying that things wouldn't last much longer and that he wouldn't go to a nursing home. So just know that information changes really quickly and you can kind of hang on waiting for something concrete, but that doesn't always come, or it doesn't always come in a timely manner. So sometimes you kind of just need to trust your gut and make the move and travel back when it feels like you need to go, because you just don't actually know what's around the corner. We definitely spent a few days thinking after the next appointment, we'll make a decision. The next appointment will be the one that will tell us the information that we need to make our decision about whether we're all coming back now or waiting a few weeks or what we're going to do. And you kind of put that trust in other people to be able to deliver you those facts, but those facts don't always come. And you can kind of spend your days just waiting for more and more information. And actually, sometimes it's better to just get on with doing the thing and actually get on a plane and get there and just figure it out when you get there. And if news ends up being better when you get there, then that's great. But just know that the facts can change really quickly when results do come in, but results can take quite a while to actually come through. When you live abroad in another country, another thing that's really, really important is to have an emergency travel fund, or at the very least an emergency credit card that is just ready and waiting for use, so that you don't have to let money get in the way of getting back. I know at the moment cost of living is crazy and flights are really expensive at the moment and everything involved in travel is really expensive. And I hate the idea that money can be that thing that stops people from going back for emergencies. It's something that I didn't really have in mind, having a proper travel fund for emergencies. But now, since I've got back, it's something that I'm aiming to kind of build up and keep, because it's really, really important to just know that that stress isn't on your shoulders trying to kind of fund a last minute emergency trip back. Something that really did help me when we had to travel back quite quickly was having an idea of what I needed to put in place in order to travel. When you've got a house and kids and dog and all of those things, so there's so much involved in traveling on a big trip abroad. You might want to arrange for somebody to come in to drain your swimming pool if it rains really heavy. You might want to give a key to a neighbour. You might need to find somebody to look after your dog or your cat. There's just so many things. You might need to cut the grass before you go, or arrange for a gardener to come and cut the grass while you're away. There's just so many different things to put in place when you're going off to travel for potentially a few weeks. And it really does add pressure to the whole thing. When I went back to the UK for our last trip, which was about 6 weeks trip a couple of years ago, I put together a blog post all about the experience. And the sneaky reason that I actually did that was so that I had a document of what I need to do next time that I go back, and I'd have pulled all the information together into one place in a list. So I've got a link available to that in the show notes. And also I've created a download that you can actually download a checklist of what you need to pack and what you need to organise, so you can go in and use that. But I found that really, really helpful just to have something to reference, because I just was losing my dad and my head wasn't in the right space to figure out what I needed to do. But also I couldn't not do those things, because things like making sure we got our dog's kennel cough vaccine up to date before he went to the kennels, things like that, we had to get them done. So having a list really helped, because I could just work through it without really having to think about it too much. The next one is to keep your passports up to date and to be aware of when they expire, because some countries that you might want to transit through or go to have rules that you need at least 6 months left on the passport when you're travelling back. So you just need to make sure that your passports are kept up to date and that you renew them in a good time. This time we were having a bit of a panic because our 3 kids' passports had some time left on them, but we also didn't know quite what was going to be involved in coming and going with my dad not being very well. We weren't sure whether we were going to be travelling back to see him and then travelling back again later for a funeral. And we were kind of stressing over, do we get them renewed straight away while we were just waiting on his diagnosis? We had a few months left, but we just didn't want to run out of the travel dates, and we really stressed over it. In the end, we decided just to wait and see what happened. And if we needed them again a bit later in the year, then we'd have to look at that fast track option. But in the end, obviously, we travelled back quite quickly, and we were back in Australia well before their 6 months were about to run out on their passports. So it was all okay. So we've now renewed them now, but just if they're starting to run low on dates, just get them renewed. It's just for your peace of mind to know that you've got them. It's really important. The next thing to talk about is that there are no right or wrong decisions. There's just different circumstances, and you're going to do different things, make different decisions at different times based on the circumstances that you're presented with and the circumstances that you're actually living at the moment. I found it really helpful to go into different Facebook groups and see what conversations people had been having around the topic of going back for a loved one who was sick or a loved one who'd passed away, and see what other people had done in this situation. And from looking at those conversations, you can see that there's so many different ways to navigate it. Some people went back for quite a long period of time. Some people travelled solo. Some people took all their family with them. Some people went back for a couple of days and then were back on a plane back to Australia again. And some people went back and spent time with the person while they were still alive and knew they wouldn't make it back for the funeral as well. So said goodbyes there, which would be just so difficult. There's no good way to do this thing, and there's no right way to do it. Just think about all of the options and think about what it is that works the best for you in your personal situation. And finally, just do your best. That's all that you can do. That's all that anyone can ever ask. My dad didn't expect us to drop everything and come back to see him. He was really pleased that we were doing that, but he was really pleased that we were going to be there for my mum more than anything. but you just do your best with whatever you possibly can do. And you can't do everything. You can't be everywhere. You're going to feel guilty for something or other, whether you're feeling guilty for pulling your kids out of school in the middle of term, or you're feeling guilty because you've left your kids behind, or you're feeling guilty because you're not able to stay long enough back in your home country or spend enough time with the person, or you're not able to be there for them while they're alive and for their funeral as well, if it ended up being sort of something that came about later on. There's just no great way to deal with all of this. All you can always do is just do your best. A few things have come out of the whole experience for me now. I think really I value my health and my wellness so much more. I know that my dad, he hindered his life by smoking so much, and I've never smoked. It's not been something that I've ever done, but just keeping fit and healthy and keeping active is really important to me. Your health is everything. And when you aren't healthy, your quality of life really does drop. So I really value my health, and I've kind of come back with a newfound interest in getting fit and strong again. And that's a really positive thing. Another thing that it's taught me, which is the pretty obvious thing, is that our time here is limited. We don't get to have a do-over. This is it. We need to make it count. We can't hold our lives back for other people. We have to get on with living our own lives. Our time here is precious, and we need to go all in and live the life that we really want to, the life that lights us up. We need to follow our own dreams and just do the things that we feel we need to do in our lives. People are going to pass away in our lives. That will happen whether we're there with them or not. It doesn't really make a difference whether you live in another country on the other side of the world. You can still be there for people. You don't necessarily have to live next door to them. And I know it's really difficult whether you live close to someone and they die, or whether you live a long way away and they die. It's difficult in either situation. No way is better. But even if you stay in your home country for your loved ones, there's still a good chance that things can happen when you're not there with them. I know that when my dad passed away, my two brothers lived in the UK. One of them lived really close by, and neither of the two of them were able to be there with my dad because things just changed really quickly and they didn't get enough warning to get there. So things can happen. It doesn't really matter whether you live in Australia or whether you live down the road. Things do happen, and you just have to do the absolute best you can and support people as best you can and do your best to be there for your loved ones. So just winding up from this episode now, my dad absolutely loved Australia. He was so supportive of us moving here. He used to say that it was the best thing that we ever have done, moving to Australia. And I'm so grateful that he and my mum have always supported us in making the move overseas, because it's a really difficult experience to do. It's really hard leaving those family connections behind. And it really, really does make all the difference when you have that family support. And I'm really grateful that I had it. And I know now that I'm going to continue making the most of living here, because I know it would be the thing that would make him really happy. One more thing that I just wanted to talk about around the subject of loss, because I know that when we live in another country, we are particularly vulnerable to this. Recently, just a bit after my dad passed away, actually, my auntie also passed away, and I wasn't able to get to her funeral in person. So I was waiting on the link to attend her funeral online. On the day of the funeral, I received a messenger message with the link to the funeral. And it was sort of a Facebook page, and it was a link to actually register to attend the funeral. When I clicked through it and had a good look, it felt a bit clunky. It felt a bit weird. It didn't feel quite right. And when I clicked through the link, it was asking me to input some payment details. It was saying that you needed to register your payment details to just create a free account, but no money would be taken, and the payment details were just there if you wanted to buy the recording later on. But it still just didn't sit right with me. So I messaged my cousin, and she was really horrified. Basically, what's happening is people or computer systems are scanning Facebook looking for opportunities where people have passed away. They're contacting everybody on the friends list. They're pulling photos off that person's Facebook profile and putting them on this funeral page as if it's a legitimate funeral. And then they're getting people to sign up with their payment details to actually attend the funeral. and then they're scamming them and taking their money. And it's a horrible, horrible thing. It was the first time I'd ever been made aware that something like this was a scam that existed at the moment. But since I posted about it in the Facebook group, I've had lots of messages from people that say that they, or people that they know, got scammed via this method. And it seems to be a really common thing that's happening. And as migrants, we're going to be more vulnerable to this because we're more likely to be logging into funerals online. So I've attended a couple of funerals online now over the last couple of years. I've never been asked to register for anything or set up an account. I'm not sure whether some systems may ask you to do that, but you should never be asked for your payment details. So just be aware of this, and hopefully just knowing about it means that you'll be more wary about it in the future. I know that I will no longer trust any funeral links that I'm sent unless I actually know the person who sent it to me directly. So that's it from me this week. I know it was a really difficult, heart-wrenching episode for me to record. I hope you found it useful. I hope it just gets some conversations going around this really difficult subject, and that maybe it just prepares you a little bit for the occasion as and when this might happen to you in the future. If you found it helpful, I would love it if you would please leave me a review. It really does help other people to discover the podcast. I'm really looking forward to next week's chat, which will be much more positive and more upbeat, and I promise there won't be any tears. In the meantime, let's get building your new life in Australia one episode at a time.